Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and this is part 3 of my series on Venus's upcoming retrograde. Now, this is a big deal again because Venus is in the sign of Gemini from April all the way to the first week of August. That's a long time, and making a big retrograde from mid-May until late June. So I've been breaking this transit down for 2 episodes already. If you haven't watched those first two, I would start with those because things are building progressively. And so you'll more easily understand this video if you watch the first two before this one. Now, in this video, I want to cover in the last video, I talked a lot about what a retrograde is and what Venus retrograde might look like or mean. In this video, I want to talk specifically about what Mercury is doing while Venus is in Gemini. And the reason that that is important, track out the Mercury dynamics of this transit, because while Venus is in Mercury's sign, Mercury's movements are always qualifying Venus's meaning. Meanwhile, this retrograde also features a big long-standing square to Neptune for almost the whole month of May, and then it comes back again at the very end in late July. And that is really toning the retrograde, because that is there all of May as the retrograde begins. And so it's whatever is happening at that time. It's usually like the first strike of the bell or the gong, and what resonates outward from whatever you start with carries through in astrology, generally speaking. Same thing for a new moon. You start with the new moon and you go, what's this new moon cycle going to be about? Think of it as a gong that's getting struck at the opening, and whatever planetary host the moon was in relationship with, if it's a new moon in Aries, then it's a Mars note that's being struck at the opening of the cycle. Where was Mars? Matters a great deal. So similarly, at the outset of this cycle, there's a couple of things we want to look at. We want to look at the opening strike of the gong, which is Venus square Neptune. We also want to look at the underlying host of Mercury, of Venus in Mercury's sign. So what is Mercury doing? So that's what we're going to do now. So let me put this up on the screen because I want to walk you through each part of this. Now, this is really, once you start adding in multiple factors in any mundane forecast, you're getting into, things get a little bit dicey. And the reason for that is, of course, that the planets have so many significations, and they're always, everything's very specific based on our natal charts. And so the other thing that's really important is that we refer back to the natal chart in order to understand how these multiple or combinations of planets may end up manifesting in each of our lives. So we can say some things generally, but typically the more planets you start adding in, the more general the description gets, the less specific it becomes. And that's true for any planetary combinations in astrology when you add 3 or 4 or more in. So we can't possibly be, so exactly specific, but I will give you some tips on the best way to make this more specific by applying it to your own natal chart. Now, if you don't know a lot about your natal chart, I will also at the end let you know how you can come and study more if you want to, because my new class starts in June. So let's just begin by remembering that right now, bring it back to the present. I forgot that this was still advanced. So let's take a look. There's the Venus at there's Venus at 12 degrees of Gemini in Mercury's sign. Where is Mercury? In Aries right now. And they actually have a sextile between one another at the moment, just passing out of a sextile. Mercury's moving faster than Venus, and that's generally the case unless Mercury's getting way slowed down. But they just pass the sextile with one another, and that's a nice smooth relationship between Venus and Mercury right now. There's a lot of get it done energy with Mercury and Aries, anything that's mental, intellectual, technical, communicative, and the ability to add in something aesthetically pleasing, or the combination of beauty and intellect working together really harmoniously at the moment, but with a real, kick of multiple irons in the fire, the multiplicity of Gemini, plus the action orientation of Mercury in Aries. So they work together well right now. And if you want to know how they're working together in your chart, look at the whole sign house of Gemini, look at the whole sign house of Aries. So let's imagine that this was a birth chart and you got it from the 10th to the 8th. How would you combine them? We start off by just giving a few basic significations of each house. The 10th is career, the 8th is other people's money or resources, or let's say it's loans or money that comes from other people. So let's say right now that you're getting some kind of extra bonus or compensation from work, or maybe you're even picking up an unemployment check for the first time, or that rebate check, or excuse me, what is it called? The government aid check is coming in right now. I was thinking of taxes. But it's not a tax rebate check. It's a, or it might be, it could be, because that would fit with the eighth house as well. So you're thinking of them mutually benefiting one another because they're configured by a sextile, both by whole sign and right now separating by degree. So the benefits exchanged between Mercury and Venus across this area, you just had digitally deposited maybe some money into an account from someone that owed you something, or you got a rebate in the mail because you overpaid something. It might be something kind of nice like that. Venus and Mercury working across the house of other people's money, debts, loans, taxes, inheritance, etc. And Venus in the career house. Maybe you're also finding allies or support or something like that. Okay, so pretty nice harmony between them currently. And then what I want to do is show you what happens next. So as we draw this out, it's going to be right about April 27th that Mercury pops into Taurus. Now, Mercury is becoming combust, which means it's falling under the power of the sun. And that could mean that Mercury is weakening a little bit and getting, let's say, um, when it gets burnt up by the sun, often it's co-opted either by the ego or by some higher force or power or necessity that Mercury basically has to bend the knee to, so that can happen, and Mercury can get a little bit weak when it's combust the sun. But that aside, what's really nice about this placement is that now Venus is in Gemini, Mercury's sign, and Mercury is in Taurus, which is Venus's sign, even though they don't have aspectual connection to one another. And in ancient astrology would have been said to have an aversion to one another. This actually means that they are in what is called mutual reception. They get along, they're helping each other out, really smooth transaction between Mercury and Venus. And here's what I want to point out, what's more, is that back it up a second. Well, look, even when they were in Aries, even when Mercury was in Aries and it was in the whole sign sextile to Venus in Gemini. In ancient astrology, by the way, astrologers considered both whole sign aspects and degree-based aspects. So at any rate, that's something that I also take a lot of time to explain in my course, because it really changes the way you look at aspects, but and how you use them too. Anyway, so they're in a sextile. Sextiles were of the nature of which planet? Venus. So they start off, Mercury and Venus, with a nice aspectual connection, harmonizing. Then they go in, Mercury goes into Taurus, where it's in mutual reception with Venus. Venus's sign, while Venus is in Mercury's sign. More harmony, more of a similar kind of energy between Mercury and Venus. So far, this is actually looking pretty good. Now, let's continue our interpretation. Well, first of all, this is just going to be really smooth, productive, earthy, sensual, practical, reliable, sturdy Mercury energy that is helping out Venus, who may be a little bit busier, or let's say has multiple different things going on. The ability to be productive on multiple fronts simultaneously. That's a kind of earth sign Mercury with the double-bodied Venus and Gemini. And then you also have just the idea of things that are smooth and sweet, tasteful and pleasant, communicative, stimulating, but also grounded. And that exchange is going to be really nice for a while. So let's plug it in here, 10 and 9, and see what we get. You bring these two together harmoniously, and let's say now that you're learning something or studying something that is going to be of practical benefit for your career. Sometimes people get an additional certificate, or they take some other training that can give them a higher credential at work, and then they get a promotion. So anything that might link positive exchange between career and education, higher education, or the potential for there to be work in a foreign country. Now, I know not a lot of people are going to be traveling right now, but I'm just making this up. But let's say that there was work and something connecting you to something abroad. Or let's say that there was an important teacher entering your life, or some kind of artistic inspiration that was coming in, and that you were experiencing some degree of joy or happiness, both mentally and in a sense professionally. So it's kind of intellectual, like high vibe intellectual, but it's very pleasing. It's not, the intellectual often is not as attractive. It feels sort of book smart and not as pleasing to the senses. But this would be one where education and attractiveness would go together, falling in love with someone from a spiritual or intellectual setting, right? Something like that. The marriage of faith and work, or faith or spirituality and the workplace or your life path, marrying the two together more in some way. Okay, so those are all productive ways in which Venus and Mercury can be helping. And what I'm also wanting to point out is note how so far, even though Venus is not yet retrograde, the shadow period of Venus, a lot of positivity. Like honestly, like Mercury and Venus getting along makes this a very different situation. So let's take it forward again. You're going to get Mercury heading through Taurus for quite some time, and then switches into Gemini. And that switch, we'll flip this around so we can use a different example too. That switch happens when? On the 11th. So May 11th. Then we have Mercury going into Gemini. Now, guess what? Once again, harmony. Why? Because now they're co-present. Co-presence means when they're in the same sign. And when they're in the same sign and Mercury is now in its own domicile, it's like, up until now, Venus has been hanging out in Mercury's house, and Mercury's been around and available. But now Mercury is actually in his house again. Mercury's like, yeah, I'm here. Anything you need, I've got it. And so now and also co-presences, or eventually a bodily union between the planets through what was called an adherence, will take place. And that means that not only are Mercury and Venus coming together, but they're blending. So they're actually merging with one another, and can signify, a marriage of the minds. It can signify projects that are digital, technical, intellectual, and beautiful or pleasing or even sensual. And again, it can speak to communicative, romantic patterns, but it's harmonious. And this is the whole reason I wanted to unpack this for everybody, is because a lot of people are kind of freaked out. Oh, Venus retrograde, what does it mean? It's like, it's got a ton of support from Mercury pretty much the whole way through. Now, there is an interesting twist that we're going to get to in a minute, but here's the two of them, hanging out in the same sign. And what's more, and this is really great, is that as this is happening, notice how Mercury is about 9 degrees away from the sun. When Mercury gets to about 15 degrees away from the sun, then Mercury becomes visible again as the evening star. Now, Venus is starting to set as the evening star right as Mercury is rising. What does that mean? It means that there is going to be some kind of exchange that happens. That, it's as though, like, Venus is hanging out, and Venus has been in the evening star, and Venus is like, you know what? I think I'm going to go into the underworld and flip positions to the morning star. And Mercury's like, well, I'll take your place. I'll come up and take your place in the same sign. There's some kind of exchange happening here, and it's probably a very valuable one. An exchange of goods, an exchange of services, an exchange of equipment, an exchange of ideas, an exchange of thoughts. In the 8th house, especially, where we're looking at the esteem or value of other people, meaning what do they think of us? What do they want from us? What do they have for us? Debts and obligations to other people, or people to us. Now, I'm making this up. This would be if you had Scorpio rising and Gemini was in your 8th house. So, but still, nonetheless, I think the idea is very similar. Mercury is, of course, part of the signification of Mercury is the marketplace, exchange of goods and services. There's something here that's becoming, it's like a really nice exchange between the two of them. But Mercury is also, in a sense, exchanging with Venus as Venus is setting. So that can also mean, for example, that people are changing the terms of a relationship or an agreement or something like that. And then the 8th house in this case would just sort of amplify that signification. But let's put it down even an hour. And let's just say that we had both of these planets now setting. So imagine now that you're Sagittarius rising in Venus and Gemini are in your 7th house. I would see this as the potential for there to be some kind of dramatic change in a romantic relationship, and but also maybe some kind of renegotiation of terms, or the details of an agreement. And it could be a relationship that's romantic, or maybe business oriented, or even a friendship. But there's like a reversal happening right around that time, but it will still yield good things. You can see that because Mercury is going to conjoin Venus right as Venus sets. So Mercury is emerging as the evening star as Venus is setting as the evening star. So it's like this One's becoming visible, the other's dropping down and becoming invisible, and they're passing each other on the way. So you have to imagine that happening in whatever house it is that it lands, that Gemini lands in your chart. If this were happening in the house of home and family, the fourth house, and you're, a Pisces rising, let's show you what that might look like. I'm just giving you examples so you can apply this to your own chart. So there is there's Mercury rising as the evening star as Venus is retrograding. Now they could be in any house. This is a process that's happening at any time of day that this is happening in the sky. Mercury's becoming the evening star. It doesn't matter which house it's in. It's the process that Mercury was in, the process that Venus was in as an archetype or a symbol. So Mercury and Venus kind of exchanging, Venus setting, Mercury rising while Mercury's the host. That could be in the fourth house, some kind of change of agreement or residence or something to do with your home or family, some kind of change that's happening in the way that things work or the way that things are organized or harmonized or something like that. Anyway, you can play with these and play with your own chart and see how it works. Now, if we go forward from there, this is where it gets really interesting. This is, to me, is the ultimate plot twist. First of all, Mercury and Venus will square Neptune. That's really interesting. I'll be doing a video on that for sure next month. But then Mercury is going to move into Cancer by about May 29th. It might even be May 28th. No, it's May 29th. So it's going to be the 28th. Yeah, it's the 28th. So here's you can see right there at the top of the chart, Mercury in late Gemini, 29 degrees, boom, enters Cancer on the 28th. Now, as soon as that happens, now we're in slightly different territory because Mercury's in the moon sign, and unless the moon is contacting Venus as a kind of intermediary or transmitter, the two aren't seeing each other, and this could start to get a little dicey because basically what we're looking at now is a host that is, it's sort of like if I'm in your house and I'm like, hey, I need dinner, but you're having dinner at someone else's house. It's like you're their guest. You can't just get up and come over and serve me because you're a guest in someone else's house at the moment. So that's the situation that Mercury's getting into once it enters Cancer. Now, they do share, interestingly, something called an antitia, and we will see that dynamic unfolding, and I'll show you how. But this is really interesting. So the antitia is going to come in more and more. I'll show you how that occurs. So Venus is retrograded by this point, right? Like late May, Venus retrogrades. And no, I'm sorry, they don't actually get into the full antitia. They're forget my antitia comment for now. I'm sorry, that was my bad. Okay, so this is interesting though, because watch, so Mercury stations right about the 17th, 18th, and then on the 19th, it's retrograde. So now we have Venus retrograde in Mercury's sign, while Mercury is retrograde in the moon sign. All right, now it comes time to put in the moon. So this is happening right as a new moon is coming through. Now, to me, this is the silver lining, because again, wherever the whole sign house of Gemini is in your chart, that's really where all of the action is concentrated. But this suggests some kind of really important moment of reversal, a dramatic change of circumstance, probably positive, I think, overall, because the moon is connecting Venus and the sun and a new moon all together with Mercury. So now you have Mercury in the moon sign and the moon in Mercury's sign. So now at the new moon time, which comes right about the summer solstice, you have a mutual reception between the moon and Mercury, connecting Venus back to Mercury. But there's a little bit of a no man's land that things could get. I want to say, you really want to watch emotional and family dynamics, especially like tribe, family, group, community, especially family members, and the way that this Venus retrograde dips into a story about family from like May 28th, just after Venus turns retrograde, all the way up until the time of the new moon, which is going to come through on the 19th and the 20th, right at the summer solstice. So from like late May to summer solstice, there's this weird twist in the retrograde story that's going to involve dynamics around family and home and just more tribal emotional qualities, real changeable. And it's not going to be the most comfortable space for the Venus retrograde. But then that new moon brings things back together. And then there's some kind of new beginning that gets started right there. And that's, that's roughly on June 20th, right at the summer solstice. You can see the sun is about to change signs into Cancer, and that's it. And then right after that happens, the moon goes right into Cancer and just brings the energy from Gemini right over into Cancer. And not surprisingly, it is just a few days after that that Venus stations and turns direct, suggesting that the turnaround may take from, say, June 20th, the new moon, to like the 26th, a week later, to sort of implement itself. And then it's about implementing the changes. And those changes are being implemented by a more yang Venus who's really, bold and is really going to strike out a new path. And that's taken you all the way through the end of June. And then Mercury's retrograde is still going on, right? And then eventually what's nice here is Mercury's going to station and turn direct like July 12th into the 13th. And then, you have the same dynamic around a little bit towards the end there, but I'm really confident that that there's a turnaround from the new moon on, and that the energy won't be as awkward between Mercury and Cancer and Venus and Gemini from that new moon of the summer solstice onward. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think it's going to come back as difficult. And then at the very end of July, around the 27th, Venus is going to cross over the square to Neptune one last time where it started. So that's like the process. That's like the full drawn out process that I thought you guys would like to see. Now, let's just back it up a second and let's try to make an interesting interpretation out of the, let's just say like this. Let's go back to the retrograde of Mercury while Venus is there and that new moon. So yeah, let's take it like right like this. And then I'm just going to, let's put it in a different house. Yeah, let's go like this. Okay, so let's say now that we're interpreting Venus's retrograde in your first house. First of all, it might have a lot to do with a change of appearance, a change of style, a change of identity, a change of something about your essential nature or makeup, the need for greater independence or freedom and love, Venus first house kind of stuff. Now, add in the new moon that was just happening there, tying together, like just put this back one day, and it's tying together the second house retrograde of Mercury that is simultaneously disposing of Venus retrograde in the first. So now what we're saying is that there's some part of this identity makeover that's heavily involved with finances, right? It's hitting that financial house of the second. But and it could be that there's just some kind of personal change you're trying to make, but there's financial concerns or considerations. This new moon around the 20th would therefore be able to, by virtue of the mutual reception between the moon in Gemini and Mercury in Cancer, be able to help you reboot and somehow start over, start fresh. And from that moment on, then I think, we start to see that the only kink in the cycle starts working itself out. And I think that's the Mercury and Cancer piece of this cycle. So anyway, that's just a little brief explanation, but you should plug these into your own chart and look. So again, where is looking through all of these, like where is Venus in Gemini in your whole sign houses? That's one whole sign per house around the wheel, starting with whatever your rising sign is, then apply. So if you're, let's just give you one more example in case you want to see, play with your own chart. Let's say you're a Leo rising. If you're a Leo rising, then Leo becomes the entirety of for your first house. You can see that the 0 degree of all the signs are marked off for each of the houses. The whole sign gets the whole house, in which case, you'd be looking at the connection between Venus in Gemini in the 11th and Mercury retrograde in Cancer in the 12th. Venus in Mercury's sign, Mercury disposing from the 12th. You might be looking at dynamics around gossip in groups of friends or something like that. That would be a very common thing for the 11th and 12th in this position with these planets. So you can always just look at whatever planet is on the ascendant or whatever whole sign is on the ascendant to figure out, okay, where's Venus in Gemini, and then where is Mercury as it passes through Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer, with the Mercury retrograde in Cancer and the new moon in Gemini on June 20th. So I know that's a lot of information, but hopefully you could also rewind this and listen to it a few times to get it and apply it to your own chart if you are a little slower or if it's not as familiar to you. Now, remember that at the outset of this transit, literally from May 3rd to May 20th, Venus is square to Neptune. And then at the very end of July, it's square again to Neptune. And it is within 3 degrees of a square to Venus is to Neptune, within 3 degrees of a square all the way through the very end of May. So I wanted to read you something because this is probably my all-time favorite thing that has ever been written about Venus Neptune that I've read. And it comes from a book called The Astrological Neptune by Liz Green. There you can see it. It's one of my favorite sort of modern psychological textbooks. She does such a nice job with Neptune Venus aspects. So it's a little bit long, but I'm going to read you part of it because I think this will stay with you. What are we considering here at the outset of the cycle? Remember, the cycle of Venus is being toned by the gong strike at the beginning. And at the beginning, that gong strike includes Venus square Neptune. And then it comes back at the very end of it again. The contacts of Neptune and Venus are the most romantic of aspects in the colloquial as well as the historical sense of the word. Venus does not describe love on the emotional level. Rather, it portrays an ideal of love, which embodies what the individual perceives as beautiful and worthwhile. Venusian relationship allows us to discover our values. What one loves, one secretly is, and it is these qualities which form the bedrock of a sense of personal worth. Aspecting other inner planets, Venus will find its vision of beauty embodied in the people, objects, and experiences of everyday life. The expression of individual values through personal taste creates feelings of contentment, and each day can provide happiness through the pleasures of the senses and the delights of human companionship. Neptune, unlike Venus, tends towards chronic unhappiness, for nothing in this world, however beautiful, can compensate for the lost waters of paradise. 2 characteristic manifestations of Venus-Neptune are divine discontent in matters of love and interference with the capacity for personal happiness. If the lover is not perfect, one feels betrayed. If the environment is not perfect, one becomes depressed. If society is not perfect, one despairs. If the body is not perfect, one longs to shrink it, enlarge it, facelift it, disguise it, or if all else fails, destroy it, for anything less than the seamless beauty of Eden cannot be born. Venus-Neptune is often associated with sexual magnetism and seductiveness. Examples such as Bridget Bardot and Marilyn Monroe abound in the world of film. But having the kind of charisma which allows one to be all things to all people may not be a promising augury for fortune, for future stability and contentment. The individual may unconsciously identify with the victim redeemer through his or her sexuality, seeking to discover a solid sense of self-worth by offering himself or herself to those who have been wounded by life. Compassion and even pity may be powerful components in what the individual defines as love. Venus-Neptune may also be drawn toward those who seem to offer redemption. It is the aspect par excellence of the pursuit of the unobtainable. Ideals of love may be conjoined with themes of suffering and sacrifice, and only a relationship involving pain and expiation is felt to be authentic. The poetry of courtly love is never far from Venus-Neptune's dreams, nor is the Oedipal triangle of courtly love ever far from Venus-Neptune's psychology. Venus concerns rivalry as much as harmony, because one cannot define one's own worth without contrasting oneself with others. The triangle-forming propensities of Venus are as evident in life as in the goddess myths. But the common or garden variety Oedipal triangle, which if we are to believe Freud is an everyday part of childhood experience, looks rather more dramatic in the waters of Neptune's world. The parent whom one seeks to claim as the divine source, and the Oedipal sin is not mere illicit erotic desire, but a longing through fusion for the omnipotence of the Godhead, as Plotinus once wrote. Our concern is not to be sinless, but to become godlike. Venus-Neptune does not desire a mortal partner in whose mirror its own values can be reflected. It seeks union with the deity. Only here can absolute beauty and perfection be found. Because the perfection of Eden shimmers behind Venus-Neptune's aspirations in love, physical perfection or the lack thereof may become a major theme in the individual's relationship pattern. Venus-Neptune may experience an unwilling but inexorable turnoff as soon as the partner is discovered to be flawed. Sometimes disillusionment can follow only one sexual encounter. Sometimes it develops over time as the partner shows those small but unmistakable signs of aging, which challenge the immortality of paradise. The fantasy of perfect sexual union is often so far removed from the mechanics of the physical act that the latter may prove a deep disappointment. Thus, disillusionment is never far away, nor is the hurt and anger of a partner who cannot understand why he or she is being rejected simply because of existing in a physical body. One of the most difficult dimensions of Venus Neptune is not the individual's own proneness to discontent. Such states of melancholy may be viewed as part of the ethos of sacrificial love, but rather the suffering caused to others who may not recognize that the problem does not lie in their own physical or sexual failings. The perfection which Venus Neptune seeks, however, may be glimpsed in art, and it is here that the aspect expresses one of its greatest resources. Even if the individual is not musically talented, there's usually a deep feeling for music, which touches one's longing for absolute harmony and fulfills many of Venus Neptune's most insistent yearnings. Poetry, painting, fiction, and drama, too, may conjure the lost Eden, which seems to beckon in the beloved's face and then vanishes all too soon. A perusal of the charts of well-known artists reveal an abundance of Venus-Neptune contacts, although the impetus for creative work cannot be attributed to this combination. If the impetus is not there, Venus-Neptune may reflect the aesthete and lover of art, particularly that romantic art, which reflects Neptune's redemptive dreams. So this goes on, she actually goes on for a while, but I wanted to read that passage because it so perfectly illustrates some of the Venus-Neptune dynamics toning this entire Venus retrograde cycle. In particular, we have to watch for the idea of the spiritual and the sensual, or the spiritual and the romantic coming together in some way, sometimes for good and sometimes because of a fantasy. If I had to say in 10 years of doing astrology, what I see people deal with the most when it comes to affairs, is that basically one partner will say, I feel like I'm spiritual or reflective or thoughtful and interested in spiritual life, and my partner is not. And so therefore I become attracted to someone who is. Okay, so that's a Venus-Neptune dynamic that you often see during Venus-Neptune transits. But it can also mean that one is becoming attracted to both something spiritual and aesthetic, spiritual forms of art, chanting, kirtan, anything that is both beautiful and otherworldly or mystical, but also delusions and fantasies that confuse, and that the longing that cannot actually be fulfilled because it's too idealistic. The exotic, the otherworldly, the mystical, the potential to be very open, to potentially get intoxicated or even poisoned with some seductive speech, or someone trying to sell you something or give you something. And so Venus, you have to Venus Neptune for poison, intoxication, trying to feel ecstasy through some way that is escapist in nature. Versus say having fun in a way that is, maybe alleviating of suffering and might be ecstatic and blissful, but is at the very least not going to harm you. So as I speak to this, because sometimes you use the word escapism, and it's not to say that spiritual life is supposed to be devoid of pleasure, but it is, it's the right kind, really. And that's a part of each person kind of figuring this out with Venus Neptune, probably. A longing for that which is intangible or subtle or beyond the ordinary. That's a Venus-Neptune dynamic. Also, the disappointment with not being able to obtain that which one desires or longs for. Potential for issues around codependency, and also confusion, deceit, deception, gossip, cloaked in something beautiful or shimmery. And idealization, and art that is beautiful, spirituality that is artistic, things like that. So those are some of the combinations that tone the whole month of May as Venus is revving up to retrograde, and then starts the retrograde, and then they come back as Venus is just about ready to leave Gemini again. Mercury gets in on this with Venus, as I mentioned earlier, too. So really interesting themes. And again, the best thing to do for that is going to be to look at the whole signs in your birth chart. Let me give you one example just to kind of show you an interpretive, a way that you could interpret this. So let's, for example, take Venus's, let's back this up and get Venus into the square. So yeah, like here we go. Here's Venus and Neptune. Let me just eliminate everything from our view right now except for Venus and Neptune. So this is at the opening. Here's their square right around the end of May. But if you back it up, you can see right around the middle of the month, it's within a degree. Back it up, it's within a degree. Back it up, it's exact. I mean, this is all of May. So what would that mean if it were in the 12th and the 9th? And these are, plug them into the whole sign houses again, Gemini and Pisces for Neptune. Well, the 9th and the 12th can be, let's just give a really super, I mean, like God forbid that this actually happened to anyone, but let's say that you fall in love with someone while on a meditation retreat, and it is the cloud of the spiritual high that you're feeling while on the meditation retreat that brings you into some kind of romantic escapade with someone that is also illicit in some way, like an affair, or that is not grounded in reality, as in there's no real chance that, outside of this feeling good and meditating, that you have a lot in common, but you don't see it. Very 12th house, 9th house kind of connection in this respect. On the other hand, it could mean something else, like going into a sort of inspired, prayerful, meditative, artistic space that's, alone or in solitude, or, artistic and sort of trance-like and otherworldly, but also you're alone and maybe making something artistic. That'd be a 12th house, 9th house connection again. So there's lots of different possibilities, but you could just, put the two planets in their whole sign houses in your birth chart to get the most accurate information. But otherwise, just watch for this all of May. This will be, you'll see it, you'll see it in the news. It's also possible, just saying, that Venus's square to Neptune can also mean sometimes the death. I mean, really, if you want to get super vivid, and I don't mean to be too heavy, but like the death of either a pop icon or a female rock star, or something to do with a woman, with Neptune, sometimes drug problems, or even mental health issues, or suicide. Sometimes even, you sometimes see that Venus in the collective, you'll see Venus square Neptune, especially as Venus is stationing, as potentially some kind of bigger, more dramatic issue with women, or a woman, or an artist of some kind, or a Venusian character of some kind. So that's something to watch for in the collective. You'll notice it as well. We're going to be visiting all of these transits again in May, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you find all of this interesting and some of this technical language was over your head, you're like, I'd love to learn more, or if you are someone who just can't get enough of astrology and you want to study more in general, maybe learn how to read charts for people, my new class, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, it's my first year class. I have a first year, second year, and a horary class. Starts in June, starts on Sundays in June. I'd love to have you there. It's a year-long program, 30 classes plus 12 guest lectures, lots of bonus material, lots of optional homework. You can take a certification test at the end if you want. There's we have live clients into the classroom. It's a pretty lively group. I'd love to study with you, so check it out. Go to my website, nightlightastrology.com. We have early bird rates, $500 off right now. There's a payment plan if you need it. And if you are really hurting because of the coronavirus or anything else, you can always apply for need-based tuition. We make that available for people too. So let me know your comments. I'd love to hear if you have Venus Neptune in your birth chart. What has it been like for you? What's the pros and the cons of that placement? Also, how are you already noticing Venus and Neptune coming together? They're not too far off already. And if you're listening to this later on in the month of May, please tell me how you're experiencing this. I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, take it easy. Bye.